Now, it all of a sudden looks like we might actually have human-level AI in a decade or less. There's lots of great things that could be done with AI. I don't feel like there's nearly as much urgency to do those things as there is to stop the development of superintelligence. The worst case outcome, the one that probably happens if we don't solve the coordination problem, is we create effectively a new species that colonizes the Earth and the galaxy and then probably destroys our habitat. Right now it's just an urgent crisis. We don't have time to be thinking about the benefits, so to speak. So we want an indefinite pause, and that means nobody building it. Basically to get rid of the advanced AI chips and the factories that make them. The house is on fire, and we need to put out the fire and then make sure that it's not still smoldering somewhere, and then we can look around and see what damage it's done and what damage we've done in putting out the fire. We have a few years basically to start taking real action there, not talking about it, but actually doing stuff.
Bienvenue dans un nouvel épisode du podcast La Prospective. Aujourd'hui, je reçois David Krueger, chercheur en intelligence artificielle, professeur adjoint à l'Université de Montréal et membre de Mila. Il a été formé au deep learning, notamment par Yoshua Bengio, qu'on ne présente plus dans le monde de l'IA. David a récemment fondé Evitable, une organisation qui cherche à sensibiliser le public aux risques sociétaux liés à l'intelligence artificielle. Il est aussi l'un des initiateurs du Statement on AI Risk en 2023. Une déclaration devenue marquante parce qu'elle a formulé très simplement l'idée que le risque d'extinction lié à l'IA doit être traité comme une priorité mondiale, au même titre que les pandémies ou la guerre nucléaire, contribuant ainsi à faire entrer ce débat dans l'espace public. La déclaration a été signée par plus de 600 chercheurs en IA et personnalités publiques de premier plan et les dirigeants de laboratoires d'IA les plus influents, notamment Sam Altman d'OpenAI, Demis Hassabis de Google DeepMind et Dario Amodei d'Anthropic. Cet épisode est en anglais, sous-titré en français, avec aussi une version doublée en français. C'est parti.
Bienvenue sur le podcast de Selle.
So you initiated the Center for AI Safety statement. I'd be curious to know if you could tell us a little bit about the background behind this and what this statement achieved.
I've been in AI, machine learning, deep learning research since 2013, and one of the main reasons I got into the field is because I was worried about existential risk, the risk of extinction, and societal risks more broadly from AI. And at the time it seemed like the experts weren't thinking about that, weren't talking about it, and I wanted to know what was up with that, and if they had good reasons not to be concerned. And it turned out that they didn't. I learned that pretty quickly after I joined the field. And so basically ever since then, I've been trying to, get the experts and the world, everybody really, to understand the situation, understand the risk, understand how urgent and dire the situation is with AI, both because it's progressing very quickly and because it's a very difficult problem to solve. For a long time, this was basically taboo to talk about in the machine learning research community. I had lots of people, arguing with me or, mocking me or just saying that this is total nonsense. It's a distraction, not something we should take seriously. And that really, that's kind of been changing gradually but consistently the whole time I've been in the field. Around 2022, it started to feel like there were enough people now who were coming to me and talking to me, being like, you've been thinking about this for a long time, right? How worried should we be? What should we do? Am I getting this right? Now, it all of a sudden looks like we might actually have human-level AI in a decade or less. I don't think we're prepared for that. A lot of these people weren't announcing this publicly and loudly, and so there were still lots of people who had the impression, and it was still common for the media to say, no experts are concerned about this. No serious people are concerned about this, which always bothered me because Stuart Russell has been vocal on this since 2014 at least. So in 2022, I was talking with some people and I was like, maybe we should have just a one-sentence statement that just says X risk is real. I think it's a serious concern, and try and get as many serious AI people, academics especially, to sign it. And in 2023, after it seemed like Yoshua Bengio and Jeff Hinton were starting to, really take this seriously and focus on it, I was like, now is the time. We really have to do this. So I messaged about 30 of my colleagues, just being like, hey, I'm planning to do something like this. I would like your help, your feedback, your input. Let's make this happen, basically. And after a little bit of discussion about whether this was sort of the right approach or if we should do, a longer letter that sort of explained the issue more. Dan Hendricks from the Center of AI Safety was like, yeah, we're going to do this, and then kind of took it forward and did, the vast majority of the work of actually getting people to sign the statement, and, promoting it and stuff like that. And also, decided on the final statement of it, which was a little bit different than what I was originally imagining, but, very similar in spirit. Why one sentence and why this? And I think that was a really key point for me, is that I wanted something that would be very legible to the public, that would just, be unambiguous. Most people aren't going to read like a 1 or 2 page statement, right? They're going to read the headline. And previous statements like this had always included existential risk in a long list of other concerns. And so people would look at these things that were signed by many people and be like, well, they're not signing because they're worried about extinction. These are reasonable people, after all. They're signing because they're worried about one of these other harms. And I wanted to make it absolutely clear that many, many of the top researchers were literally worried that AI would lead to the end of humanity.
You have a deep background in machine learning, deep learning. You are a researcher with Yoshua Bengio, and yet now you moved to movement building, basically. So was there a specific moment that made you think technical alignment won't be ready, we need to change strategy, basically?
No. To some extent, that's always been my view. So even before I got into the field, my perspective has been that this is primarily like a coordination problem, a governance problem. I mentioned that I wondered whether people in the field were worried about this, because at the time it was really, people online like Elias Yudkowsky and people like that who were talking about this. And the arguments that I think were being put forth were always, I found, a little bit unconvincing in terms of the details of like the technical aspect. So it was kind of like, well, this thing is going to be like optimizing some utility function. And if you optimize some utility function really hard, bad things happen. And I'm like, why does it have to be optimizing utility function? Can't we just like throw, an if statement at the end that says, if utility high enough, stop, you're done, stop optimizing. It's an ongoing discussion as far as I'm concerned. It's an open research question, to what extent their intuitions and reasons for expecting AI to sort of almost inevitably or sort of naturally have this shape of something that is ruthlessly, insatiably optimizing. To what extent those intuitions are correct versus a lot of people nowadays, including a lot of people in AI safety, have the opposite intuition that like, no, AI is kind of more like, like a person, like they're going to have a lot of the same like common sense or like sort of, common sense morality or like rules that they just won't break. Yeah, so I consider that an open question, but to me it was always pretty clear that like, if the AI itself isn't, automatically going to optimize for utility, the people building it are going to build things that are very agentic, that do, go hard, as they say in the book, if anyone builds it, everyone dies, that are, trying to get as much power as possible because, they're going to try and get that power for themselves. People will do that even if they're not, know that the AI might not give them the power, and that it is, has a chance of going rogue, has a chance of, even if it doesn't go rogue, doing something very different from what they intended, having externalities. There's lots of ways in which people are willing to take bets that they shouldn't, especially from the perspective of the long-term collective good. We should expect to drive people towards producing systems that have a lot of risk and a lot of harm. So it's sort of like an issue of like recklessness or negligence, and I think that's, we see that already with lots of other problems that, are global problems, like climate change, war, global poverty. Like we haven't done a great job with these kinds of problems historically, and I view this as just another in that reference class, except, the worst case outcome, the one that probably happens if we don't solve the coordination problem, is we create effectively a new species that, colonizes the Earth and the galaxy and so on, and then, probably destroys our habitat.
Avant de continuer, j'ai un petit service à vous demander. The Flares, c'est un média indépendant. Moi, c'est Gaëtan et sur cette chaîne, j'explore les enjeux du futur à travers des vidéos et des podcasts. Si ce contenu vous plaît, pensez à liker, commenter et partager, ça aide énormément la chaîne. Merci. And so yeah, you created an organization called Evitable. What are you trying to prevent? Like, what's evitable?
Evitable as in not inevitable. So this is, a reference to what I think is increasingly the main argument for continuing what I think is a completely insane course that we are on towards building artificial superintelligence as quickly as possible with less and less regard for the safety of it as the competitive pressures mount. More and more people recognize that this is crazy, this is not something that we want to be happening. More and more the people who say we shouldn't stop, their basic argument is, well, we can't. It's inevitable, this is just gonna happen, so we may as well do our best to steer it. We may as well try and make the good guys be the ones to build it as opposed to the bad guys. On the off chance, or if you're more confident than me about the technical alignment problem, because then they'll be the ones in control. I think it's more likely that nobody really ends up in control in any meaningful sense. So that's the name, that's the motivation. I think we've been seeing continuous progress in people's attitudes and understanding of the problem, not just in the technical research field, but in wider society at large. It gives me a lot of optimism, even though I don't think it's happening fast enough yet. I feel like there's been like a whole series of bad arguments against taking this problem seriously and doing what needs to be done to slow, pause, stop the development of more powerful AI that have been defeated, like one after the other. And now this is like the final boss, basically. It's like the inevitability argument. It's like all that's left, essentially. So we just really need to show people that like there is a way to stop it. But the broader mission of the organization is kind of just to do whatever is needed to inform and organize people to effectively confront the risk from AI, from especially more advanced AI and superintelligence, and especially the large-scale societal risks. So extinction we've talked a lot about, but also things like unemployment, concentration of power, etc.
Yeah, so I guess it's to shift the Overton window. Do you find that talking about extinction risk by superintelligent AI is perceived as like credible, plausible, or it's still sci-fi for some people? And do you think the best strategy in the communication of this problem is to, I guess, focus on maybe risks that are easier to grasp and then slowly build up to, actually it's another species we're creating?
I think there's room for a diversity of strategies. Part of my motivation is I like informing people. I think people have a right to know like what's happening and what the reality is, and I think I'm good at explaining things to people. In terms of like if this is credible, we're working on gathering more information about this and where the public is at. I think, but like short answer, yes. It's always been the case, I think, that the public is more concerned about this sort of thing than like the experts were, when everyone in the field, like I was saying, was kind of skeptical of it. And I think it's kind of common sense. I think the main things that have stopped people from being concerned about this is basically thinking that it's too far off to worry about, which that's kind of where I was at before I heard about deep learning, when I thought it was like centuries off. Like I was still worried, but I was like, let's work on the sort of meta problem of like how to make better collective decisions and do better like collective sense making. But yeah, I think like if it's decades away, that's still way too close for comfort, because again, like look at the reference class of other problems that we're still not solving despite having decades to solve them. Global problems, war, climate change, all that sort of stuff. I think people's views on this are changing rapidly. I think like awareness and salience of AI as an issue is going up really fast. I think people are very, very concerned now about AI taking their jobs and there being no plan in place to, give them the basic means they need to survive if that happens. So that's a very clear risk to people. I think the, takeover risk, I think the machine learning research community and the media have historically done a huge disservice to the public and the government and policymakers as well. Basically, so many people have been saying, don't worry about it, it's not a real thing, it's too far off to worry about, etc. And this is just, it's really upsetting to me because I think it's misinformation, That continues, there's a lot of powerful interests that are trying to spread that misunderstanding. But I think a lot of people still are worried, and I think part of what's happening is that they don't feel yet like that concern is shared by other people. So I recently attended a presentation where somebody shared the statistic that when they survey people, there's like a 30% gap between how worried they say they are and how worried they say their neighbors are. So they think that they're like the only ones worried about this, right? And I think a lot of people still aren't talking about it. It's still like a little bit of a soft taboo. Like you don't want to be the first person to be like, oh, hey guys, I think like AI might, become super intelligent and kill us just like in the sci-fi movies. It's a very sort of socially risky thing to do, or it can feel that way anyway. And then if you don't see anybody else talking about it, you don't think that it's a real thing, or you don't think other people are worried about it, even if in your heart of hearts you're like, this is concerning. So I think a lot of people get it and are worried, and I think that's going to increase dramatically in the near future.
Yeah, it reminds me of like people who live in totalitarian countries. It's risky to say to the neighbor, like, this sucks, we need to do something. But then, everyone shares the same opinion. But I guess the risk is obviously completely different with talking about this.
Yeah.
And you also, in the recent presentation you did at MOOCs in SF, you were mentioning this cultural omnicide, and I've never heard about this before, so could you maybe explain what it is?
Yeah, so cultural omnicide is a term I came up with when I was making that presentation. I've been looking for a way to describe this societal scale risk. So there's this idea of cultural genocide, which is the destruction of a people's culture. So you might not literally like kill everybody in this, community or this ethnic group or whatever. You might assimilate some of them, kill the ones who don't assimilate, and like sort of force them to abandon all of their customs. There are many futures with AI that do that, but like for basically all human culture. Right now, we see lots of people, having increasing amounts of like relationships with AI, having increasing amounts of time they're spending with, digital products and platforms that are designed to be addictive. And if you kind of just, extrapolate those trends to the limit, which may or may not be a reasonable thing to do, the picture that it paints is one of people having no meaningful human interaction in their life and spending all of their time kind of like connected to some sort of digital dopamine drip. I think for a lot of people, that's a dystopian enough future that they would say, again, like, we shouldn't be doing this. Let's do sort of whatever it takes to stop this project. So even if it doesn't, kill everyone, even if it doesn't take everyone's jobs, if that's the future we're headed for, like, it calls into question the whole project.
Yeah, it's like the ultimate AI slope endpoint or something like that. Or it reminds me a bit of the Matrix as well, like living in fake realities, but it's delusion. To stop super artificial intelligence being built, we need some coordination, international coordination. You mentioned that we could take inspiration from basically the uranium, for example, tracking uranium. So in the case of artificial intelligence, it would be tracking data center or compute. There might be a fear of totalitarianism at some point, like there is this big, agency that's controlling compute.
Yeah, absolutely. So historically, I think most people, when they think about stopping AI, have been like, well, the only way to do that would be some sort of mass surveillance regime, maybe like a totalitarian world government. And that seems really bad. Let's not do that, So we just have to, hope that we can steer it or something. If your PDOOM is high enough, you might say, okay, actually, I'm going to go with the totalitarian world government thing, because, if we don't, like 99+% chance we just all die. My PDOOM isn't quite that high, but it's high. But I think this is wrong. I think the third option, which is the one that I advocate for, is basically to get rid of the advanced AI chips and the factories that make them. And so this is different than what you were describing, where there's some system for governing those chips and governing those factories. I'm saying that's too hard, at least for now. We don't know how to do that in a way that doesn't have this kind of risk, and then also have the risk that the governance regime just fails and somebody builds it anyways at some particular time in the future. We want as much time as we want to make that decision about if and when and how to proceed. So we want an indefinite pause, and that means nobody building it. And so the way to do that, I think, is to get rid of the basic means that you need to build AI in the first place. And so that's what I think is probably the right solution. Something that we could in fact do if world governments, major world powers were interested in doing that. We know where most of this stuff is. The supply chain is extremely concentrated for building the chips. Technically, I think it's the easiest and most robust solution, because the real thing that makes it hard at the end of the day, technically, I think, is that governments need to have confidence that their adversaries aren't building superintelligence in secret. And in order to do that, there's a bunch of things they can do. They can spy. They can use satellite imagery. They can just track various hardware and components and stuff like that. But you really don't want it to be the case that if a government does change its mind and say, I know we had this agreement not to do it, but we're going to do it, and they might announce it. They might do it in secret. Whatever. If when you find out they already have all the chips there, or even worse, they already have a very smart model there that has just been restricted to only behave in certain ways, the lead time you have to intervene and stop them from doing this is going to be, hours to months, hours if it's the model, and maybe months if they have to do a whole pre-training run or something like that. Whereas if they have to re-engineer the compute supply chain, build factories to build, the machines that build the chips, all of that, then you're looking at a lead time of years, which I think is actually enough time that governments would be able to find a way out of that. What would otherwise be an acute crisis that would be, I think, likely to trigger World War III, essentially.
Do you think that's compatible with still making progress in narrow AIs, like curing cancer with using AI tools, or you would completely limit the amount of chips we can access and then therefore kind of plateau any progress?
No, I think it's absolutely compatible with that. But there would be, an immediate cost in terms of the, quote unquote benefits of AI. Things like medical research definitely seem like a pretty unambiguous benefit. Some of the other economic benefits I question, the framing as benefits, because I think it's also redistributing wealth towards people who are powerful and rich already. So there would be a cost there. I think in the long run, we can do something that's less crude and brute force. But right now, it's just an urgent crisis. We don't have time to be thinking about the benefits, so to speak. So I like to say it's the house is on fire and we need to put out the fire and then make sure that it's not still smoldering somewhere, and then we can look around and see what damage it's done and what damage we've done in putting out the fire, and then we want to think about how to what caused the fire. Do we need more fireproofing or fire extinguishers? How, why did this happen in the first place? Then once we've done all those things, then you can think about turning on the burner again. And so I think there's lots of great things that could be done with AI. I don't feel like there's nearly as much urgency to do those things as there is to stop the development of superintelligence. That's just, we have a few years basically to start taking real action there, not talking about it, but actually doing stuff. But even right now, I think there's a lot of stuff that you could still be doing. So it wouldn't completely stop that kind of research and work. It would slow it down some.
Thank you. I don't know if there's anything you want to add that I haven't asked, but...
No. Thanks for the interview. Great talking to you.
Thank you. Okay, great. Le futur de l'IA ne se décide pas seulement d'en haut, il se construit aussi d'en bas par la pression citoyenne et toutes les actions qu'on additionne. Avec Pause IA, vous pouvez interpeller vos élus en quelques clics. C'est rapide, c'est automatisé et le lien est en description. Et si vous voulez aller plus loin, j'ajoute aussi le portail d'un ami de la chaîne, le Futurologue.